Hey, it's Amy Newmark. I'm off this week because I'm finishing up our books that are coming out for the Christmas season. So we're going to rerun the third week of the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast from back when we started. And we didn't have as many listeners then, so chances are you haven't heard these episodes yet. So I think you're going to enjoy them.
Changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your daily dose of Chicken Soup for the Soul inspiration. This daily podcast is the way that I get to share with you everything I've learned from our stories as author, editor-in-chief, and publisher of Chicken Soup for the Soul. One of the privileges in my job is that I get to meet fascinating, inspirational people through their stories. And now I get to introduce you to those people. And these people give us stories that are empowering, uplifting, encouraging. They tell us what we can do with the tools that we already have within ourselves. And they tell us how we can find the keys within ourselves to being happy, productive, and purposeful. Storytelling brings lessons to life, right? And that's why we do what we do at Chicken Soup for the Soul. We get to publish books that are filled with real-life stories from real people. These are ordinary people who have had extraordinary experiences. They're all true stories, which is fabulous for me because I love true stories. And these true stories have a great impact on us because they are true. And very often these stories are life-changing. And today I'm going to talk to you about a story that had a huge impact on me. It's one of my absolute favorite stories in our entire library of more than 20,000 Chicken Soup for the Soul stories. And this story opened my eyes to the fact that I have a right to choose my friends. I have a right to choose friends who make me happy. That sounds obvious, right? But think about it. Do you have any friends who don't really add value to your life? You might find that you reduce the time you spend with them. You might view your get-togethers with them as obligations. Friends are supposed to be the people we go to for relaxation, for fun, for those wonderful breaks from daily life. But instead, you might be saying, as I used to, I have this friend and I have to call her. She's always complaining. I don't really like talking to her anymore, but, I have to. Well, why? Why do you have to? It's different if it's a family member. If they're family members, you love them and you spend time with them, even if they drive you crazy, right? We all have that. But friends are optional. You get to pick and choose. And that's a wonderful concept and really was new to me when I read this story 4 years ago, and it's stuck with me ever since. So this story came from a book we have called Chicken Soup for the Soul, Hope and Healing for Your Breast Cancer Journey. Now, that sounds like it's a book about breast cancer, but in fact, it's just a book filled with wonderful life lessons because people who have cancer really do cut through everything, don't they? And they get to what really matters in their lives. And in this book, Georgia Schaefer wrote a story called Eliminate the Negative and Accentuate the Positive. She wrote about what happened when she had a recurrence of her breast cancer, and a friend was driving her to chemo one day and spent the entire time talking about people she knew who had died of cancer. And then Georgia had an epiphany. Here she was, fighting to make her cancer go away. It was a slow and painful process, but she had to get this toxic thing out of her body. And she was sitting in the car next to this toxic friend who was trying to rob her of joy as well, but she had a choice. She could make the friend go away right then and there. So Georgia wrote the following in her story. The harsh reality is that I became painfully aware that some people are not positive and life-giving. Rather, their negative or thoughtless interactions are draining and in some cases toxic. She goes on to say, I learned the hard way that I needed to protect myself as much as possible from contact with that kind of negative or thoughtless person. I had never realized that just like the weeds in a garden rob the flowers of vital moisture, nutrients, and sunlight, so too the weeds in my life were robbing me of the vital energy I needed. I needed to eliminate the negative as much as possible and then accentuate the positive. Like the flowers in my garden turned toward the sun, I decided to focus on the loving, beautiful connections in my life. This is fabulous advice. We absolutely should weed the gardens of our lives on a regular basis, pulling out the negative so that everything else can thrive. And I found a great quote from Mahatma Gandhi that sums this up beautifully. He said, "I will not let anyone walk through my mind with their dirty feet." So I had an epiphany from George's story back in 2012, and I hope that it causes an epiphany for you too. We get to choose our friends. This is great news. But what about our coworkers? You don't usually have a choice there. So the next time we get together, I'm going to pass on a tip for making your office or workplace a happier place. I'm Amy Newmark. Thank you for listening today to the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast. I would be so grateful if you would help me spread the word by telling your friends. And I know that this is the first time that many of you have listened to a podcast. I know I was new to podcasts just a few weeks ago. So please, when you're telling your friends to listen, give them a little lesson as well on how to use a podcast. And if you'd like more stories and tips from the book that I mentioned, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Hope and Healing for Your Breast Cancer Journey, go to our website, chickensoup.com.